The sky above the colony turned red as fire spread across the horizon. Ships cut through the clouds like blades of steel, and people looked up in fear as the dark shapes fell lower with every moment. The sound of engines grew louder, and hearts in the small settlement began to pound, because they all knew what was coming. The alien empire had chosen this world as its next target, a world too far from the core to receive help in time. A world with farmers, children, workers, and only broken defenses. The earlier battles had already destroyed the colony guards. The fleet had been scattered in the void, and no one was left to fight back. So the people believed the end was close. They whispered prayers. They hid in their homes. They held their loved ones close, and they prepared for silence. The ships landed outside the colony with dust rising in tall clouds. Doors opened, and alien soldiers marched out in rows, their steps heavy and their bodies shining under thick armor. They were tall, they were strong. They were made in labs to be perfect killers. Their eyes glowed with a cold fire. Their weapons hummed with power, and each one of them looked as if nothing in this world could stop them. Not walls, not bullets, not time. The aliens had crushed every enemy they met. Their commanders called them super soldiers, and the galaxy feared their name. Worlds fell before them like dry leaves in a storm. Resistance never lasted long, and even the bravest warriors failed when faced with their strength. And so the Empire sent them here with no doubt, certain this colony would fall in hours, certain no one could stand against them, certain their power was enough. But in a small house near the edge of the settlement, an old man watched the sky burn, his hands calm, his breath slow, and his eyes sharp. He was a human veteran, once a Marine who had fought in wars long ago, when human fleets still roamed the stars with pride, when battles had been fought on worlds the aliens never dared to touch, and when victory had come with blood and pain. He had seen it all, and though his body was older now, though his bones ached, though his hair was gray, his mind remained clear, and his will was as strong as iron. He had left the service long ago. He had chosen silence, a life alone, far from noise, far from war, far from death. And he had lived as a ghost among the colony. Children whispered stories about the strange man who never spoke much, who trained in the dark, who walked the hills at night, and who looked at the stars as if he carried memories no one else could bear. But now the ghost stood alive again, for war had come, and war was something he understood better than anyone. The people of the colony did not look for him. They thought he was just an old man with nothing to give. They thought he would hide like them. But he did not hide. He stepped outside his home, the red light of fire painting his face, and he looked at the alien ships with cold eyes, and he whispered to himself with a voice that held no fear, no weakness, only steel. The words were simple and sharp. Not today. The aliens moved with perfect order. Their commanders gave signals. Their weapons shone. Their eyes scanned every corner of the colony. They laughed at the fear they saw in human faces. They thought victory was already won. They thought nothing stood in their way. But they did not see the old man watching. They did not see the calm hunter preparing. They did not understand that the battle had not yet begun. The veteran turned back into his house. His hands moved with speed as he opened a case hidden under the floor. Inside was a rifle, old but cared for, clean and ready. Beside it were tools, maps, and devices from a time before peace. Things he had kept when others had thrown away the past. Things he had kept because he had always known war never ends. He lifted the rifle, his arms steady, his eyes cold, and he smiled, a hard smile. Not of joy, but of knowledge, for he knew the aliens had made a mistake. Outside the colony, the soldiers marched in a formation, their armor shining, their weapons ready. They looked like a wall of metal and fire, unstoppable and merciless. But every wall has cracks, and every soldier has fear, and every perfect machine breaks when faced with something it does not understand. The aliens had strength, but they had never faced a man who had nothing left to lose. They had never faced a man who had lived with death as a friend. They had never faced a man who had spent his whole life learning how to fight and how to win when victory seemed impossible. The people of the colony did not know yet, but their survival rested on the shoulders of one man. Not a young soldier, not a hero with shining armor, but a tired veteran with scars and memory, scars that told stories, memory that whispered lessons, and will that would not bend. The aliens thought they had found a weak world, but they had found him, and that meant everything would change. He stepped outside again, the rifle across his back, his boots heavy on the dust, his eyes fixed on the fields where the alien army stood. The wind carried the sound of their voices, the growl of their machines, the hum of their weapons, and the air smelled of smoke and fire. But the man felt no fear, only calm, only focus, only the clear thought that this was his fight, his moment, his war. He was not young, but he was ready, more ready than the aliens could ever imagine. The night came, the stars shone above the smoke, and the old veteran stood in the shadows of his home, watching, waiting, planning. The aliens believed the colony would be crushed by morning. They believed the humans would kneel. But he knew different. He had seen giants fall. He had seen armies break. He had seen fear turn to courage. And he knew the same would happen again. He whispered once more, this time not for himself, but for the colony. Not today. And so the story began with fire in the sky, with fear in the people, with power in the aliens, and with one man standing alone, silent and calm, ready to fight, ready to show the galaxy that humans are never weak, ready to remind the enemy that no matter how strong they are, no matter how many soldiers they build, no matter how perfect they think they are never ready for the will of one human who refuses to fall. The old veteran sat inside his small home as the night stretched long, the air heavy with the smell of fire and the echo of alien machines. He cleaned his rifle slowly, his hands steady, his breath calm, his eyes sharp like a blade, and in the silence his mind drifted back to the years that had shaped him. He was not always an old man hiding in the hills. Long ago he had been young, strong, filled with fire. He had been a Marine when the human fleets still carried banners across the stars, when battles raged on broken moons and burning planets, when men and women of Earth and her colonies stood together against enemies who thought humanity would bend. He had fought on sand worlds where the air was poison. He had fought on ice planets where the cold froze blood in the veins. He had fought in the blackness of space where only courage and skill kept a soldier alive, and each battle had carved its mark into his soul. He had seen friends fall. He had seen commanders fail. He had seen enemies who were stronger, faster, and smarter. Yet he had also seen the truth that humans never gave up, never bowed, never stopped fighting. And that truth became part of him. He carried it in his blood, in his scars, in his eyes, and no enemy could take it away. As the rifle lay across his knees, he remembered the time his unit had been trapped in a canyon on a distant world, surrounded by machines built to hunt them, their weapons nearly empty, their hope nearly gone. Yet they had survived not through strength, but through patience. They had waited, they had listened, they had used the land itself as their ally. And when the machines advanced, they struck with fire and stone, with fear and courage. And victory had been theirs. That lesson never left him. It whispered in his mind now, as alien soldiers filled the fields outside the colony. He remembered another world where the enemy outnumbered them 10-1. Their commanders ordered retreat, but retreat was death. So he and a small band of Marines had fought street by street, house by house, corner by corner, never letting the enemy move freely, turning every shadow into a trap. And though they were broken and bleeding, the enemy had fallen, and the world had been saved. From that day, he had learned that numbers mean nothing if courage stands against them. The veteran leaned back in his chair. The wood creaked under his weight. His body was older now. His bones ached with each movement. His hair was gray, his skin lined, yet his spirit was not weak. Age had sharpened him like a knife left too long on the grindstone. He no longer wasted energy on anger or fear. He had only focus, only clarity, and that made him far more dangerous than he had ever been as a young man. The children of the colony had always whispered about him, calling him the old ghost. They saw him walking the hills at night, training in silence, running drills when no one else watched. They thought he was strange. They thought he was broken by war. But the truth was that he had never stopped being a soldier. He had never put away the lessons of battle. And deep inside, he had always known that war would return, for war never ends. It only waits. He stood and walked to a shelf, where a small metal box sat covered in dust. He opened it slowly. Inside were medals, old papers, and photos of faces long gone. comrades who had fought beside him, men and women who had laughed and bled with him, their eyes forever young in the pictures, their voices forever silent in his memory. He touched the edge of one photo with a rough hand, and for a moment his face softened, but only for a moment. Then he closed the box again and returned his mind to the present, for the past could guide him but not hold him. Outside, the alien soldiers moved with perfect order. Their boots thundered across the soil, their armor reflected fire, their weapons glowed, and their voices carried across the night. The colony people listened in terror, hiding behind doors, praying the soldiers would not find them. But the veteran did not pray. He prepared, his mind mapping the land, his memory recalling every cave, every ridge, every shadow where a man could disappear and strike again. The world itself would be his ally, just as it had been before. He remembered the day he retired, when he had walked away from the military, tired of endless orders, endless battles, endless loss. He had wanted peace. He had wanted silence. But even then he had known peace would not last. Humanity had too many enemies, and war always came again. He had chosen this remote colony because it was quiet, far from the centers of power, far from the noise of armies. But fate had chosen otherwise, and now the war had come to his doorstep. He walked outside and looked at the colony houses. Small lights flickered inside. Shadows moved as families hid together. Mothers held children. Fathers whispered promises of safety, and fear filled the air like smoke. The veteran watched them, and though he had lived alone, though he had spoken little, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. If he did nothing, they would all die. If he fought, there was a chance. And he knew what choice he would make, because he had always made the same choice before: to fight, to stand, to refuse surrender. The alien commanders believed they faced only civilians. They believed the colony was weak. They believed their super soldiers would crush it without effort. But the veteran knew they were wrong, because one man who refuses to fall is never weak. One man with will is never powerless. And one man with experience can be deadlier than an army of perfect soldiers. The aliens thought their victory was certain, but they had not yet met him. He returned inside once more, checked his rifle, checked his tools, checked the explosives he had hidden long ago in the hills. Everything was ready, and everything had meaning now. The traps were old, but they would work. The land was harsh, but it would serve him, and his body might be tired, but his mind was sharp, sharper than ever. He whispered to himself again, the same words he had spoken earlier. Not today, not today, not ever. The night grew deeper, the colony silent, the alien soldiers waiting for orders, and the veterans sat in the dark, eyes open, mind alive, remembering every war, every loss, every victory, and knowing that soon the past and the present would meet. And when that moment came, the aliens would learn what countless enemies had learned before, that humanity never surrenders, never bends, never dies quietly, and that one old veteran can be the storm that breaks an empire. The ground shook as the alien drop ships landed outside the colony. Dust rose in thick clouds, and the roar of engines rolled across the hills like thunder. The people inside their homes trembled. Some pressed their hands to their ears. Others hugged their children close, and in every heart the same fear took root, the fear that no one would survive the night. The ships opened with a hiss, heavy doors sliding down into ramps, and from the dark metal came the alien super soldiers. They marched in perfect lines, tall and broad, their armor glowing under the fire of the sky, their weapons humming with energy, their eyes cold and without mercy. They looked like machines made of flesh and steel, without weakness, without doubt, without soul, and they moved forward as if the world already belonged to them. The colony had no army left, no soldiers to fight, no ships to flee, only families hiding in silence. And the aliens knew this. They had been told the colony was defenseless, that it would fall without a single shot fired, that this mission was nothing but a display of power, a way to remind the galaxy that no one could resist their empire. The alien commanders expected no trouble, only submission, only fear, only silence. But they had not counted on the old veteran who watched them from the shadows. The veteran stood at the edge of the settlement, hidden in the rocks, his rifle resting across his chest, his eyes never leaving the enemy. He watched their steps, their movements, the way they turned their heads, the way they held their weapons. He studied them with the calm patience of a hunter. Every detail stored in his mind, every weakness noted, every mistake remembered. He was one man, yes, but one man who had survived battles that should have killed him, one man who had learned that. Every giant falls when struck in the right place. The aliens laughed when they saw the houses of the colony, small and fragile compared to their war machines. They spoke to each other in sharp voices, confident, arrogant, certain of victory. They did not fear the humans hiding inside. They did not believe any danger waited here, but still they sent a squad into the narrow valley near the settlement, just to be sure, just to show strength. And that squad walked straight into the trap the veteran had set. Long ago, he had hidden charges beneath the rocks of the valley, explosives old but reliable, wires carefully buried, switches tested many times. No one else in the colony knew about them. No one else even guessed they were there. But he had kept them ready, waiting for the day he feared might come. Now the day had come, and now the trap would be sprung. The squad of alien soldiers moved down the valley, their heavy boots crushing the stones, their armor bright under the pale moon, their weapons raised but loose in their hands. They thought nothing could touch them, nothing could harm them. But the veteran crouched in the darkness above the valley, one hand on the switch, his eyes cold and unblinking, and when the moment was right he pressed it. The ground roared, rocks shattered, fire burst from beneath, and the alien squad stumbled as the valley floor split apart. Dust and smoke filled the air. Confusion spread through their perfect formation. Their voices shouted in anger and shock. Their armor burned with heat, their bodies thrown from their feet, and in that chaos the veteran struck, silent, precise, deadly. He lifted his rifle, aimed with care, and fired, one shot for each soldier he could see. He wasted nothing, his aim true, his hand steady. Each sound of his weapon echoed across the valley. Each alien who rose was cut down before he could stand. They tried to regroup, but the rocks around them turned into death traps. Every corner held fire. Every shadow hid danger. And the perfect soldiers began to realize they were not untouchable. They were prey. The colony people heard the blast from far away. They looked out from windows with wide eyes, wondering what had happened, wondering who had fought back. Some thought it was another alien weapon. Some thought the end had come even sooner than they feared, but then they heard the sharp rhythm of a human rifle, and hope sparked like a small flame in the dark. A whisper spread from house to house. The old ghost is fighting. The old ghost has returned. The aliens outside the valley turned their heads as the sounds reached them. Commanders barked orders. Soldiers adjusted their stance, their discipline returning quickly. They tried to read the battle, tried to understand, but they did not yet see the truth. They thought perhaps a hidden unit had survived. Perhaps the humans had kept a soldier behind. They did not yet realize it was only one man standing against them. One man tearing holes in their perfect order. Inside the valley, the fight grew wild. Alien voices rose in panic. Their commanders shouted at them to stand, but the veteran moved faster, smarter, his shots always coming from a new angle, his shadow always shifting. He was everywhere and nowhere, a ghost in the smoke, a storm in the rocks. And the aliens began to make mistakes. They turned too quickly. They fired without aim. They shouted instead of thinking. And each mistake gave him another chance to strike. By the time silence returned, the valley was filled with smoke and broken bodies. The alien squad was gone, wiped out, crushed not by an army, not by machines, but by one old man who had waited for this moment all his life. He did not smile. He did not cheer. He only checked his rifle, counted his rounds, and melted back into the shadows, ready for the next strike, because he knew this was only the beginning, and the enemy had many more soldiers to send. The alien commanders received reports of the loss. Their voices turned sharp with anger, their pride wounded. They could not believe it, could not accept it. They told themselves it was chance, it was luck, it was nothing. They sent new orders. They demanded new squads sweep the land. But in the back of their minds, a seed of doubt took root. For if one squad could fall, what else could happen? What other surprises waited in the dark? The colony remained silent, but the flame of hope grew brighter. Mothers whispered to their children that someone was fighting. Fathers clenched their fists in quiet courage. and even the old and weary felt their hearts beat faster. The veteran did not fight for glory. He did not fight for thanks. He fought because he could not allow surrender. He fought because every lesson of his past demanded he stand. And he fought because humanity never bends. Night covered the world, the stars burned above, and in the shadows of the hills the veteran prepared again, his traps reset, his rifle loaded, his eyes fixed on the horizon where more alien soldiers waited. The battle was far from over, but the first contact had been made, and it was not the aliens who had shown strength. It was not the aliens who had crushed their enemy. It was one human who had shown the galaxy a truth they had forgotten, that no empire, no army, no super soldier could ever be ready for the will of a human who refuses to fall. The alien commanders were furious. Their perfect super soldiers had fallen in the valley, a place they had believed safe, a place they had believed already won. Their voices rang out like sharp blades, demanding order, demanding revenge, demanding proof that their warriors could not be touched. They refused to accept weakness. They refused to believe that a single human could stand against them. And so they sent more soldiers to hunt, more soldiers to sweep the land, more soldiers to show that their empire was unshaken. The veteran watched them from the hills, his eyes calm, his breath steady, his hands resting on a rifle across his knees. He knew anger was their weakness. He knew rage broke discipline. He knew that the more they wanted to prove their power, the more mistakes they would make. And he waited with patience, for patience was his greatest weapon. The land itself had become his ally, and the soldiers marching below were stepping into the jaws of a trap they could not yet see. The alien squad spread out, their boots heavy on the ground, their armor bright under the pale sky, their weapons ready, but their focus clouded by pride. They moved into the canyon that stretched beyond the colony, a canyon the veteran knew well. He had walked its ridges many times. He had mapped its shadows. He had hidden surprises in its narrow throat. And now those surprises would awaken, for the canyon would be their grave. The soldiers entered the canyon without fear, their voices sharp as they called to each other, their formation tight, their steps confident, but every step brought them closer to death. The veteran crouched on the cliffs above, his hand resting on a small trigger, his eyes never blinking, his heart steady, and when the moment came he pressed down, unleashing fire and stone. Explosives roared from the walls. Rocks broke free and crashed into the soldiers below. Dust rose thick as night. Screams echoed in the canyon, and the perfect formation shattered in an instant. The aliens stumbled. They fell. They cried out in rage. But the canyon gave them no mercy. The ground split under their feet. The sky shook with the sound of destruction, and confusion wrapped around them like a storm. The veteran did not waste a chance. He raised his rifle, aimed with cold precision, and fired. Each shot struck true. Each strike clean. He wasted nothing, for every bullet mattered. And the aliens fell one by one. Their armor strong, but not strong enough. Their bodies large, but too slow. Their weapons powerful, but blind in the dust. They tried to regroup, but his fire tore them apart before they could find each other. His shadow moved across the rocks, and they could not see him, could not touch him, could not stop him. The alien commanders outside the canyon shouted orders, their voices filled with fury. They demanded the soldiers hold the line. They demanded discipline. But the soldiers inside the canyon were already broken. Panic spread in their ranks. Some fired wildly into the dust. Some tried to climb the walls. Some called out to comrades who were already gone. Their pride cracked. Their strength crumbled. Their training forgotten. And fear began to take hold. For the first time in their lives, the perfect soldiers felt fear. The people of the colony heard the blasts, the echo of fire, the roar of falling rock. They huddled together in silence, their eyes wide, their hearts racing. They did not know who fought. They did not know how. But hope stirred again, small and fragile but real. Whispers spread from one home to another. The old ghost is fighting. The old ghost is winning. In their fear, a spark of courage began to grow. They saw that the aliens were not gods, not monsters beyond reach, but enemies who could bleed. Inside the canyon, the smoke cleared slowly. The ground was covered with broken armor and silent bodies. The survivors staggered, their weapons shaking in their hands, their voices weak, and the veteran struck again. silent as shadow, deadly as night. He moved from rock to rock, firing without pause, never staying in one place, always one step ahead. The soldiers tried to chase him, but the canyon belonged to him. Every corner, every stone, every echo, and they died one after another, powerless to stop the ghost in the dark. The alien commanders received the reports, and their rage turned to disbelief. Their super soldiers, built in labs, trained in perfection, armed with the finest weapons, had been broken by one human, one old man with scars and gray hair, one man who refused to fall. They tried to call it luck, they tried to call it chance, but deep inside they felt the cold truth. They were facing something their empire had never prepared for. The will of a human who had nothing left to lose. The veteran did not smile, did not cheer, did not speak. He only checked his rifle, checked his traps, and moved deeper into the hills, his body tired but his spirit strong. He knew this was only the beginning. He knew the aliens would not stop. He knew they would come with more. But he was ready to fight, ready to remind them what it meant to face humanity, ready to show them that even in the darkest hour one man can turn the tide. The colony remained silent but alive. The people watched the horizon with new eyes. Children asked their parents if they were safe. Mothers whispered that someone was fighting for them. Fathers clenched their fists and felt strength return to their hearts. The legend of the old ghost grew stronger. They did not know his name. They did not know his past. But they believed, and belief was the first step to survival. The aliens gathered outside the canyon, their commanders burning with shame, their voices sharp as knives. They swore vengeance. They swore to crush the ghost. They swore to erase the shame from their records. And they sent more soldiers to surround the hills, to hunt him, to end him. But the veteran waited, calm and patient, for the trap had only begun, and he had many more lessons to teach, lessons written in fire, in stone, in blood, and the aliens would learn them all. Night fell across the land once more. The stars watched in silence. The colony lay in shadows. The aliens prepared for the next strike, and the veteran sat alone with his rifle, whispering the same words he had spoken before, words that cut through the darkness like steel. Not today, not ever, not while I still draw breath. The news spread quickly among the alien soldiers. Whispers carried through their ranks like cold wind. The stories of what had happened in the valley. The stories of perfect warriors crushed by one human. At first they denied it. At first they called it lies, tricks, illusions. But the bodies in the canyon were real. The silence of their fallen comrades was real, and the weight of fear began to grow inside them. The commanders barked orders, their voices sharp as steel. They demanded silence. They demanded discipline. They told their soldiers to forget fear, to remember strength, to trust in the empire. But fear does not leave so easily. Fear lingers. Fear eats at the edges of the mind. And the soldiers looked at the shadows of the hills with new eyes, eyes that saw ghosts in every stone and death in every tree. The veteran moved among those shadows with quiet steps. He knew the land better than any map. He knew the rivers that cut through the rocks, the caves that sank into darkness, the ridges that overlooked the valley, every path, every slope, every turn. He used them all as his weapons. The world itself became his ally, and the aliens marched deeper into a place that did not belong to them. He did not strike with open force. He struck with patience, with cunning, with silence. He would wait in the dark, watching them pass, counting their steps, learning their rhythm. Then he would hit and vanish before they even understood. A shot from above, a trap underfoot, a blast from the cliff, and by the time they raised their weapons he was gone, moving through the land like smoke carried by the wind. The aliens grew restless. They tightened their formations. They fired into the shadows. They shouted at one another, but nothing worked. The veteran never came from the same place twice, never gave them a pattern, never gave them a weakness to follow. He was not fighting like a soldier in their books. He was fighting like a hunter, and they were the prey. One squad marched into a cave, certain they had cornered him. Their lights cut through the dark. Their voices echoed off the walls. Their boots stamped heavy on the stone. But in the silence above them he waited, ropes and hooks set long before. He brought the rocks crashing down, and their cries filled the air before silence claimed them. When the dust cleared, nothing was left but broken armor and the shadow of his passing. Another squad crossed a river at night, the water cold around their legs, their armor heavy, their weapons lifted high. They moved slowly, their eyes sharp, but from the trees above the veteran struck. Fire rained down. The water turned red. Panic spread through their ranks. And when they looked for him, he was gone, vanished into the forest, leaving only fear behind. The commanders raged as the reports came, their pride bleeding with every loss. They demanded the soldiers push harder, move faster, search wider, but the harder they pushed, the more mistakes they made, and the veteran watched them with cold patience, striking only when the moment was perfect, never too soon, never too late. Every strike another wound in their pride, another crack in their spirit. The colony began to whisper his name louder, the old ghost, the Marine who never died, the man who fought alone. Parents told their children to be brave because the ghost was out there, standing for them. The people who had once thought him strange now thought him savior. And hope grew stronger, hope that maybe they would see another sunrise, hope that maybe humanity would not fall. The aliens called him a demon, a shadow, a curse. They refused to speak his human name. They feared it. Instead, they cursed the ghost who hunted them. They cursed the man they could not kill, but curses brought them no safety, no victory, and every night more of them vanished into silence, their weapons left in the dirt, their bodies carried away by fear and fire. The veteran moved with steady purpose, his body tired but his will unbroken. Every strike reminded him of the wars he had fought long ago. Every battle brought back the faces of comrades lost. Every shot was a promise kept, a promise that humanity would never surrender. Not then, not now, not ever. He was not fighting for glory. He was not fighting for thanks. He was fighting because this was who he was. This was all he had left. This was his final duty. The alien commanders at last began to understand. They were not facing a colony of farmers. They were not facing untrained civilians. They were facing one man who carried the strength of 100, one man who carried the lessons of a lifetime, one man who would not stop until he fell, and they began to fear that perhaps he would never fall at all. They tried to change their tactics. They tried to move quietly, to spread out, to bait him, to lure him into traps. But the veteran was older, wiser. He had seen all these tricks before. He had used them himself long ago, and he knew how to break them. He never took the bait, never walked into their snares. Instead, he turned their plans against them, making them victims of their own arrogance, each failure cutting deeper into their spirit. Night after night, the hunt continued, the alien soldiers marching with weary steps, their eyes wide in the dark, their hearts heavy with dread. They no longer believed in their invincibility. They no longer believed in perfection. They no longer believed victory was certain. They believed only in the fear that the ghost was watching, that he was waiting, that he was always just beyond sight, ready to strike again. The veteran moved alone, but he was not truly alone. The land moved with him, the silence carried him, the darkness shielded him, and the colony prayed for him, their hope resting on his shoulders, their survival resting on his rifle. He was more than one man now. He was a symbol. He was proof that humans could never be broken, and the aliens could feel it, the weight of it pressing down on them, turning their strength into weakness. As dawn broke over the hills, smoke rising from broken machines, silence covering the valley once more, the veteran crouched on a ridge, his rifle across his knees, his eyes sharp and unblinking, and he whispered to himself the words that had carried him through every battle, the words that carried him now. Not today, not ever, not while I still breathe. And the hunt would continue until the last alien soldier understood that truth. The alien commanders gathered in the heart of their camp, their voices sharp and filled with fury, their faces twisted with disbelief, for they had lost squad after squad. Their super soldiers who had been shaped in labs, trained to perfection, armed with the best weapons, had fallen to one old human who refused to die. They could not hide the truth any longer. Their empire was being humiliated, and pride demanded that this insult be erased no matter the cost. So they gave the order for all remaining soldiers to march on the colony, not squads, not fragments, but the full force of their surviving army, every weapon ready, every step heavy, their voices rising together in chants of war. They would crush the settlement in one great wave. They would burn it to the ground. They would show the galaxy that no human could resist them, and they believed that numbers would end what one ghost had begun. The people of the colony heard the thunder of boots across the land. They felt the ground tremble under the weight of the alien host. Fear swept through the houses like cold fire. Mothers clutched their children. Fathers gripped old tools as if they could be weapons. Old men and women whispered prayers into the dark. But they all knew that no prayer would stop what was coming, and their only hope was the veteran who stood alone against the storm. The veteran watched from the ridge above, his rifle heavy across his back, his body tired from endless nights, his hands worn from battle, but his eyes still sharp, his will still unbroken. He saw the alien host spread across the land, a sea of armor and fire, their banners high, their weapons glowing, their numbers far beyond anything one man could face. Yet he did not turn away. He did not retreat. He walked down the ridge and stood between the colony and the enemy, one man against an army, one shadow against the storm. The aliens laughed when they saw him, their voices harsh, their words sharp. They mocked his age. They mocked his scars. They mocked his rifle. They believed him weak. They believed him broken. They believed he would fall like dry grass before fire. But he said nothing. He did not answer their voices. His silence was heavier than steel. His silence was louder than their chants, and it unsettled them more than any shout could have done. The battle began with a roar. The alien soldiers surged forward, their formation tight, their weapons spitting fire, their voices filled with rage. The ground shook as they charged, but the veteran did not run. He did not break. He moved with calm steps, his rifle lifted, his aim steady, and his shots rang out sharp and true, every bullet finding a target, every strike cutting through their wall of strength. And their charge slowed as confusion spread like cracks in stone. The veteran moved with the patience of a hunter, never wasting energy, never wasting breath. He struck and shifted, always one step ahead. The aliens tried to surround him, but he broke through their lines like water through stone. He turned their size against them. Their numbers became a weight. Their weapons became obstacles. They were strong but too slow. They were many but too blind. And he was everywhere at once, a shadow they could not touch. The colony people watched from their homes, their eyes wide, their hearts burning with both fear and hope. They saw one man hold back an army. They saw him move like the battles of old. They saw him strike with the will of all humanity, and their whispers grew louder, their courage stronger, for they saw that he was not fighting alone. He was fighting for them, with them, and through him they stood against the Empire. The alien commander at the front roared in anger, his pride bleeding with every fallen soldier. He ordered his best warriors to crush the ghost, to surround him, to end him, and they charged with fury, their blades flashing, their weapons burning. But the veteran met them with steel in his eyes. He moved like he had moved 1,000 times before, his body old, but his spirit endless. He dodged, he struck, he fired, and one by one they fell, their perfect training useless against his experience, their strength meaningless against his will. The field turned into chaos, smoke rising, bodies falling, voices crying out in rage and fear. The alien army that had believed itself unstoppable now stumbled, their pride shattered, their discipline gone. They looked at the old man and saw not weakness but death, not age but power, not one human but all of humanity standing in his shadow. And terror took root in their hearts, a terror they had never known before. The veteran knew his body would not last forever. He felt the weight in his arms, the ache in his bones, the fire in his lungs. But he pushed it aside. He had no time for weakness, no time for pain. This was his final stand, his last war, his last gift to the people behind him. And he would not fall until the enemy was broken, until the last alien understood the truth, that no empire can conquer the will of a free human. The aliens pushed again and again, wave after wave, each charge heavier, each attack stronger. But the veteran met them all, his traps still hidden in the earth, his bullets still sharp, his mind still calm, and every strike cut deeper into their spirit. Every loss shook their pride, Every moment brought them closer to collapse, until the commander himself stepped forward, desperate to end it, desperate to save what remained of his army. The commander was taller than the rest, his armor brighter, his weapon stronger. He shouted to his soldiers that he would end the ghost with his own hands, and they cheered, hoping his strength would save them. But the veteran only watched him with calm eyes, no fear, no doubt, only silence. And when the commander charged, the veteran did not move until the very last breath. Then he struck, fast as lightning, sharp as steel, and the mighty commander fell like the rest. Silence spread across the battlefield. The alien soldiers froze, their leader gone, their pride broken, their army shattered. They looked at the old man standing alone, his rifle across his chest, his eyes like fire, and they felt the weight of defeat crush them. They had marched with certainty, they had believed in perfection, but now they saw the truth. They were nothing before him, nothing before humanity, nothing before the will of one man who would not bow. The veteran stood tall, though his body shook, his breath heavy, his hands worn. He looked at the aliens, and he spoke at last, his voice low but clear, "Leave or die." And they knew he meant it. They knew he would fight until the last breath. They knew he would never stop, and fear broke them. They turned, they ran, their army scattering into the night, their empire's pride shattered on the soil of one small colony. The people of the colony poured out from their homes, their eyes wide with awe, their voices filled with cries of joy. They gathered around the man who had saved them, the man who had stood against an empire, the man who had shown them that courage is stronger than fear, that will is stronger than strength, that one human can be the shield of many. They reached for him with trembling hands, but he only raised his rifle once more, silent, steady, ready for the next fight, for the war was not yet done. The battlefield lay in silence, smoke curling into the morning air, broken armor scattered across the earth, weapons glowing faintly in the dust, the alien army gone, scattered into the dark hills, their commander fallen, their pride crushed. But the veteran did not lower his rifle. He stood tall, though his body trembled, his eyes sharp, though his breath was heavy. He knew the fight was not over, for empires never forget. Empires never forgive, and a shadow of revenge would come again. The people of the colony gathered around him, their voices filled with awe and gratitude. They called him savior, protector, hero. Yet he shook his head, his face calm but hard. He told them not to worship him, for he was only a soldier doing what had to be done, only one man standing where no one else could. And though they wanted to believe the war was finished, he knew it was not. He knew the empire would send more, stronger, faster, more ruthless than before. That night he sat alone by the ridge, the stars shining above, the land silent around him. And he thought of the past, of battles fought long ago, of comrades who never returned, of promises made to brothers in arms, promises to never let humanity fall, promises to fight until the very end. He thought of the faces of those who had trusted him, those who had fallen beside him, and he whispered their names into the wind. A roll call of ghosts who still marched beside him in silence. Far beyond the colony, the empire seethed, their pride torn, their soldiers destroyed, their commander dead, and word spread like fire across the fleets, across the worlds they ruled, that one human had defied them, that one man had stood against their perfect warriors, and fear began to whisper in places where no fear had ever lived, fear that humanity was not weak, fear that humans could not be broken, fear that the empire had awakened something it could not crush. The high council of the empire gathered, their voices sharp and filled with rage. They demanded answers. They demanded revenge. They swore the ghost would be destroyed. They swore the colony would be erased. And they swore the galaxy would remember the cost of defiance. So they prepared a greater force, larger than before, ships that could darken the sky, weapons that could shatter stone, soldiers bred for war. They swore this time the human would fall. They swore this time humanity would kneel. But the veteran had lived too long to be blind. He knew their pride. He knew their fury. He knew they would not accept defeat. And he prepared. He set traps across the hills. He carved paths of fire through the forests. He trained the people of the colony to hold weapons, to fight as one, to stand not as farmers, but as defenders, and he told them the truth, that the empire would return, that fear was coming, but that courage was stronger, that the only way to survive was to stand together. The people listened, their hearts heavy but their eyes burning with new fire. They had seen one man defy an army. They had seen what courage looked like, and they chose to fight. They chose to be more than victims. They chose to carry weapons and walk the path of defenders. Old men who had once farmed fields now sharpened blades. Young women who had once carried water now trained with rifles. Children learned to move silent through the trees. The colony became a fortress of will, a place where fear no longer ruled. When the empire returned, their ships breaking through the sky, their weapons glowing in the clouds, their banners shining with pride, they believed this time victory was certain. They believed this time they were ready, their voices filled with confidence, their chants shaking the ground. But as they marched upon the colony, as they looked upon the ridges and hills, they felt unease, for the land itself seemed to wait. The silence seemed too deep, the air too heavy, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The first wave moved forward, confident, armored, powerful, but the ground split beneath them. Fire roared from the earth. Traps laid by patient hands exploded in light and sound. Confusion spread. Shouts rang out, and before they could recover, the veteran struck from the shadows, his rifle singing, his steps sharp, his eyes cold. The ghost had returned, and fear spread once more through perfect ranks that had never known defeat. The second wave tried to outflank, moving through the forests, but the people of the colony were waiting, no longer helpless, no longer weak. They struck with fire and steel, their courage burning brighter than their fear. Every man, every woman, every child fighting for the home that was theirs. The aliens had come for easy prey, but they found wolves with teeth, wolves who had learned from a master, wolves who carried the fire of humanity in their hearts. The battle raged through the night, smoke rising into the sky, cries echoing across the land. The empire's numbers vast, their weapons strong. Yet they faltered, for numbers mean nothing when fear spreads, when doubt grows, when courage burns brighter than strength. The veteran moved through the fight like a storm. The people fought beside him. The land itself struck against the invaders, and slowly the perfect soldiers began to break. They were shattering like glass under stone. The empire's leaders watched in disbelief, their pride unraveling, their plans collapsing. They had believed in perfection. They had believed in certainty, but they had never faced humans who refused to surrender. They had never faced courage that burned brighter than fear. They had never faced one old soldier who carried the spirit of 1,000 battles in his heart, and they realized too late that no army, no weapon, no empire could ever truly conquer such will. As dawn rose, the field was quiet once more, alien banners broken, alien weapons silent, their armies retreating into the shadows of the hills, their pride shattered, their voices gone, and the veteran stood once more upon the ridge, his rifle across his chest, his body broken, but his spirit unyielding. And he looked at the sky, at the stars where the empire still waited, and he whispered to them with fire in his voice, "You are not ready. You will never be ready, not while humans still stand." The people gathered around him, their voices rising with pride, their hearts filled with courage. They no longer saw themselves as victims. They no longer saw themselves as weak. They saw themselves as defenders, as warriors, as part of something greater. They saw that through the veteran they had learned the truth, that humanity does not break, that humanity does not bow, that humanity always rises. And they swore that the next time the empire came, they would be ready. The veteran lowered his rifle, his eyes calm, his body weary, but his heart strong. And he knew his duty was not finished, for wars never truly end. But he also knew that humanity had been awakened, that the fire inside them would burn long after he was gone. And for the first time in many years, he allowed himself a small smile, for he had kept his promise. He had stood, and he had shown the truth. They were not ready. They would never be ready.